from the top at the Blue Ridge Parkway down to the bottom by Camp Greer is a 12.4 mile downhill run with 4,280 feet of descent and only 700 feet of climbing. And as far as I can tell through talking with folks, that's pretty much the longest downhill run on the East Coast. Certainly, it's a spectacular one, regardless if it gets to hold that claim or not.
Welcome to Trail Effect. I am your host, Josh Blum. Trail Effect is a show that dives into the stories behind trails, the communities that embrace trails, and the people who rely on trails as a way of life. The goal of this show is to turn the stories you will hear from our guests into useful knowledge that can be applied to your community while providing some entertaining and inspirational content. Guests on Trail Effect include trail builders, board members, community leaders, volunteers, and regular people who really enjoy trails. For episode 172, we have Jeremy Poore. Jeremy is based in Old Fort, North Carolina, which is not too far from the infamous Ashville, North Carolina. Old Fort is ramping up to be the next community to embrace the benefits of trails and outdoor recreation. We covered all things Old Fort, trail building school through McDowell Tech, Jeremy's thoughts on the 2024 PTBA Conference, along with his thoughts on the 2024 SORBA Summit. There's a ton going on in this conversation, so kick back and enjoy the show. Cooley Creative is the title sponsor for this episode. They design and build custom websites, as well as help companies with branding, photography, and e-commerce. Cooley Creative was started in Wisconsin, but is now based out of Bend, Oregon. Jared from Cooley Creative is a friend of mine. We've traveled together on multiple mountain bike trips, and sometimes he sends it. For more information about Cooley Creative, head on over to www.dudejustsendit.com. Yes, that's right, www.dudejustsendit will get you to the Cooley Creative website, so check it out. Cattle Mountain Apparel, the brand that was built by travelers, hikers, trail runners, and mountain bikers, with the motto of venture far, laugh hard. While I definitely use Cattle Mountain apparel for mountain biking, Cattle Mountain is also my go-to choice for daily wear as it is super functional and comfortable. Cattle Mountain Apparel also offers a lifetime gear repair program with the goal of extending the life of their products while reducing waste in the process. If you ever damage any of your apparel, Cattle Mountain will repair it for free for life. By using the affiliate link found in the show notes or on the Trail Effect website, a small commission will come back to the Trail Effect podcast, which helps to cover the cost of expenses for keeping this show going. Now on to the Trail Effect with Jeremy Poore. Here we are today on Trail Effect. I have Jeremy Poore. Jeremy is from Old Fort, North Carolina. He is the coordinator of trail construction and sustainability at McDowell Tech. He is also the owner of Mountaintop Shuttles, and he is a voting member of the McDowell County Tourism and Development Authority, along with a crew leader for the G5 Collective, a C. Sawyer for the U.S. Forest Service, a principal on, this is a big intro, a principal on the Old Fort Community Learning Pump Trek, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. I'm sure I left at least 10 things out, but that's kind of the nature of people who come on this podcast, because all of us in the trail community have our hands in probably way too many things, right?
That's true.
How's it going today?
It's going great. Beautiful day.
Yeah, it's actually sunny where I'm at. It's been raining like I feel like I'm in Seattle at the moment because it rains at least once a day here, if not all day. So it's kind of getting old.
All the leaves have popped here in Old Fort, so it's green everywhere. Beautiful springtime.
Well, you and I met in person at the PTBA, the most recent PTBA conference back in March. It was March, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Georgia at Lake Lanier Resort. Let's get your take on this PTBA trail conference, and have you been to other PTBA conferences / what are your thoughts on this one versus other ones if you have?
So yeah, this is my second one. Last year I went to the big international symposium in Reno that was put on with American Trails.
That was big. I was there as well. That was a little different.
That was, 900 people or something. So a little bit different than that. This was more focused, the builders. And, I love these conferences. I love seeing the energy people have for trail building and really the sharing of wisdom. This one in particular, and probably everyone you talk to is going to say that they had some kind of cool experience with Glenn Jacobs. But, I got to spend a couple hours with him on the Sunset Cruise. while he was drawing out a sketch of his famous Quark Knuckle. And we just talked about everything that he's doing with trail town development. And for me, that was really special because I'm here in Old Fort and we're building lots of trail and we're rebuilding a town that once upon a time was a great place to be up into the 50s until all the mills started to close. And this is our kind of new phase of life. And I want to make sure we do it right. So, having Glenn's semi-divided attention while he drew this masterpiece was pretty special.
Yeah, and I was next to you and him for a lot of that drawing, and so that was definitely a special moment, or one of the more memorable moments from this conference for me as well.
Yeah, that was great. I also had it was my second time speaking I did each conference, and the first time was higher education panel. This time was specifically talking about how to bridge the gap between trail construction and maintenance. And
that's a big bridge.
It's a big bridge. And the more miles or thousands of miles of trail that we build, of course, then that has to be maintained. And so the premise of that conversation was, let's get real about what volunteers can really do. And, where does the professional trail builder step in to fill that gap? And it was a standing room only into the hallway session with a lot of energy and a lot of people who were super excited to participate or frustrated or, trying to understand the issue. So I had a great time with that as well.
What are a couple takeaways that you had from that for those that weren't able to attend either that session or weren't able to attend the conference at all?
So I did a couple raise your hand polling in the session, and I was shocked to learn of the 25 professional trail builders in attendance, only one had a recurring maintenance contract with any of their builds. And the second poll after that was, how many of you would like to have a recurring maintenance contract? And 0 builders raised their hand. So it really shed some light on that concept of builders who want to be artists and want to be out blazing new trails, design, build, put their mark on the world, versus that concept of, either taking something and making it sustainable, or even maybe optimizing an existing trail that needs a full rehab. So I think there's a whole shift in thinking that would have to happen to fill that gap.
So I came up with the concept. I don't know if I've vocalized this on the podcast or not. This is a concept I actually came up with on my way down to that conference specifically. And some people are going to laugh at this, but I think we're doing trails wrong from a business perspective. I think we should be giving the trails away and then charging for maintenance contracts after the fact. And now I know that people are going to say there's challenges with that, but I say that kind of tongue in cheek as, partially as a joke. But I also think on a functional level, it would change the way that some things get built, and it would change the way we look at things, because if it means that we have to get more efficient with our build practices, and I'm not saying we haven't, because I think as a industry or community, we have definitely gotten way better at building trail, and we're doing it, we're trying to do it the best we can in most situations. But I think it would push that bar up even more. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. Yeah. So giving up that big payoff, right, as you're turning in your log sheet on how many linear feet you've completed, that would be tough for some folks. But I wonder if you could get some amount of that up front, per like a yearly maintenance contract or something, or a guaranteed number of years of maintenance. But it is interesting because, like, how you think about, for example, we're at a place in post-industrial United States where so much of our infrastructure was built with concrete. And our modern concrete, it gets harder for 50 years and then it slowly deteriorates. So bridges, dams, we're struggling under this huge crippling debt of maintenance on that side of, our infrastructure. And on the same token, our Forest Service sites something like 1,000-year backlog in trail maintenance. If they were to bring all of the trails and all of the national forests in the United States back up to sustainability for the first time, that would be something like 1,000 years of work with the current labor force. So, yeah, how do we bridge that? I wonder if you did charge that way, you could at least ensure that a trail you built today would be nicely maintained in 5 or 10 or 20 years.
Well, and some of the point of that is that, you build a trail, you get paid to build that trail once. If you're under contract for maintenance, it's like, it's a business model that is perpetually reoccurring, right? Or at least for a certain period of time. So while right now we're in a situation where there is a lot of work out there and, so it's not hard to find projects, this would pretty much, guarantee work for a long time.
That's true. Joseph Liddicker at Black Diamond Trail Designs offers a maintenance package with every build, and he puts together several different options. So I know that if some people are trying to figure out a hybrid version of those two to make sure that people feel like they don't have to fully rely on volunteers for every little thing that they need. And even Ed Sutton with Trail Dynamics has a recurring contract with the Fire Mountain Trails in Cherokee, North Carolina. And you interviewed recently Peter Mills with Elevated Trail Designs. He has a similar contract with Chestnut Mountain in Canton, North Carolina. So like I'm seeing little things pop up that make me feel like people are understanding that, you need a professional crew for certain things and certain intervals.
You brought up the regular, what we commonly refer to as traditional infrastructure aging, and the appetite or mindset of maintenance for that stuff, at least I worked 6 years in highway maintenance for Wisconsin DOT. In that 6 years, I had budgets to oversee for 2 counties. In 5 of those 6 years, there was a $0 increase in both those counties for those budgets. But at the same time, we saw increases in both equipment pricing and labor pricing, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's like the continuation of more with less. But you see new stuff get funded, regularly. And that's where that's where the balance of a lot of times people are like, where's my tax money going? It really goes into a lot of new stuff, and there isn't much that goes into maintenance. And at least that's my perspective from my former working environment. And I don't think it's changed a whole lot.
No, that seems to be the case. I was just down at the SORBA Summit in Noonan, Georgia, last month, and that topic came up. They were talking about Philip Darden, the executive director, and a few of us were talking about how do you fund that. And they seem to think that there's a way to package the maintenance as a palatable or even, dare I say, sexy, not really, way to get grant money. Because, it comes in big chunks. And if you can put together, say, like a trail rehab or renovation or optimization, there's probably some buzzwords that they have that I don't have. But they have a really good grant writer on staff at SORBA, and she has access to, all the grant databases and all that. So she'll help anyone in that organization out in terms of finding a way to fund maintenance and construction.
Yeah, we should call it trail reconditioning. You brought up Philip, and I want to quick stay on this PTBA conference before we go to the SORBA Summit, because that actually was my next topic here.
Okay.
Closing out the PTBA conference, you also brought up Glenn early on, where all of us got to go ride with Glenn. How was that? And get chased by Apache helicopters. Like, that's probably an unreal moment, right?
That was quite loud. And it was one of those, are we in a movie? Is Jason Bourne going to come around the corner on an e-bike? What's going to happen next? But yeah, it was really cool to ride with him and the whole crew. You don't always get a chance to do that, especially with builders who've been building for decades, and yeah, I love his attitude and his energy, and he was always like, well, just send it, like, all right, let's do it.
As he sent his e-bike through like a waist deep creek crossing.
I know that was pretty remarkable.
Oh man. But that was, I mean, I couldn't believe we're literally getting stalked by Apache helicopters. And I don't think you could explain that to people, but I don't think they really would understand it unless they were there with us, right?
Yeah, I honestly feel like they saw us and they were just playing around because they were bored, in some training operation or something.
Yeah,
who knows?
I texted Mike Ryder after that, and I think Mike was who told Glenn to go to where we rode at. And Mike made the comment back about how when night riding has happened there in the past, there's a military base nearby, obviously, and they've startled mountain bikers with night vision goggles apparently in that forest.
Oh, wow. Well, that would wake you up.
No kidding, huh? So yeah, I think they were totally playing with us.
Yeah, for sure. They were definitely showing off. I mean, there are a lot of maneuvers they were doing, obviously they're not going upside down with a helicopter, but it looks like they were coming pretty close.
Oh, they were just above right above the canopy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on to the SORBA Summit. SORBA obviously is, I'm going to say, the most organized trail organization in the nation. They cover 47 or more different clubs in, I think, 7 states, if I'm not mistaken. How is that? Yeah, and they do these twice a year.
Twice a year, 10,000 members now. Yeah, they're growing quickly. So yeah, this was the second summit I was able to attend. Last year, we hosted it here in Old Fort. And as a special kind of kickoff to the McDowell Tech Trail School, which I'm sure we'll get to later, I was able to set up 5 classes for pre-conference so that people who needed chainsaw training for Forest Service work, or people who were wanting to learn to become a better trail crew leader for their local organization, were able to get trained up. And that was super cool. And that's, how I got the invite to come down to this next one this year and teach a class myself. And I love the group. Philip and I get along really well. I love riding with him. We see each other at all the different events around here, whether it's the outdoor economy conference that's held in Cherokee each year, or, just some local shop opening or something. But yeah, the energy is great there. And really they're really good at sharing how to navigate their local land manager issues, local trail build issues. Each chapter has the freedom to deal with all their contracts and everything their own way, but they do a great job of coming together and sharing knowledge and wisdom with each other. And I think that twice a year is pretty crucial for that, the face-to-face time.
Yeah. And I know in talking to other, SORBA club presidents or executive directors, everyone always has great praise for those summits.
Yeah. I mean, we rode 5 days in a row, different trail systems all around Noonan. And even when we do the classes, we'd end at 3:00 sharp, don't go over 3:00. So you got to get that ride time in afterwards. But I think it's a real testament to how well the class was received and how energized people are to come to those conferences, that, in a class of 12 people, we'd have 8 people stay for the ride after. You've been outside sweating all day, and now you're riding together and then you're going out and hanging out, having beers and food. So yeah, it's a great group of people.
Yeah, that riding is a critical component that got us all into this usually, but a lot of times we will push to the side to get more work done. So I didn't know that things end sharp at a certain time just so riding can occur, because that's important.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Well, let's get into your backstory, as to how it relates to mountain biking and what brought you to where you are now.
Okay, well, let's see. 1993, I got my first specialized stump jumper hardtail. I was a senior in college, and my parents had said, if you get a full ride to college, we'll get you a car. Well, I didn't get a full ride, so I got a bike. So, living here, growing up here in Hendersonville, which is kind of equidistant to Asheville from Old Fort, just on the other side of the triangle, I had Pisgah National Forest in my backyard, and a bunch of trails out of my neighborhood, just a mountain ridge line that a person owned, and it was undevelopable. So it would just had tons of 4x4 trails, and we made them mountain bike trails. But so, I was riding trails like the Black Mountain Trail over in Brevard that most people have heard of or ridden back then on a 26-inch wheel hardtail. And if you would have tried to do that a couple of years ago before the reroute, you'd be over your handlebars in no hurry at all. So it's pretty amazing to see how mountain biking has changed, how technology has changed for bikes. A buddy of mine said he thought that the technology innovations in mountain biking kept pace with the degradation of trails. So it seemed to be kind of the case as we were going down 1 foot to 2 foot drops every 20 feet on the old Middle Black Mountain Trail. It was definitely not that way in the early 90s when the wave of mountain biking was pushing across the country from Mount Tam to Colorado to eventually North Carolina. So I got into it then and been riding ever since, mostly just for fun, just for the sense of adventure and exploring new places, for the camaraderie. For years, I didn't ever mountain bike by myself. It was only a group thing. And lately, as we're building the scene in Old Fort, I do a little more solo riding than I would choose if I had more people here to ride with. But that's rapidly changing as this Old Fort Trails project picks up and as more and more people come to the area or just even become aware that there's a little more going on over here. So that's the mountain bike start. And then there was a turn that happened, from just riding bikes to wanting to take part in trails officially. And it's probably something that a lot of people would say. I know listening to last week's podcast with Peter Mills, you guys got into the rogue trail topic. And I wouldn't say I ever made rogue trails from scratch, but definitely guilty of the side hits, the old B line, along the side. I started volunteering with Pisgah area SORBA years and years ago. And then I ended up in Clemson, South Carolina with my wife, who was doing grad school at the time. And they have a beautiful experimental forest there that the university was given as part of a land grant. And so I'm out there and I see these beautiful lines on this kind of downhill oriented trail. And I uncover some, lines on the side of the trail. And, I'm riding them in and I'm thinking, this is great. This is going to be awesome. I wonder how long it'll take for somebody to see these, like if they'll get excited about them too. And very next day, I'm riding out there again, and there's these white notebook size sheets of paper that are slid inside those clear paper protectors, the 3-ring binders. And it's like, whoever you are that's doing trail work, stop. Authorized trail work only. And it had the person's phone number and name. And they said, please give us a call. Would love to talk with you. Basically, please stop building. So I was freaked out. I was like, man, did I do something that wrong? Like, what's going on, right? You never know. Then I'm at the local bike shop, and one of the guys there had a hint that it was me. And he's like, well, I don't know if you know who's doing the trail work, but, they saw the guy's Jeep over there at the other side of the forest, and somebody tracked him down on Strava. And I'm like, what is this place? It's like it's like a military operation. It's like we're out there with the Black Hawk helicopters again. So I decided to reach out to the Ian Davidson, who is at the time, the volunteer coordinator for the Greater Clemson Mountain Bikers Club. And we had a great chat on the phone. He invited me out to do work. And this is the key. He invited me out to do work. So I go out there with him and Jerry McClure and Warren Buckley, the 3 guys who were doing most of the maintenance out there. And we go out and do some drain work, do a little reroute of a section, and I'm hooked. And I think, I wanted to share that story because if you become a member on Facebook of the Greater Clemson Mountain Bikers Club, you can see the original post with the pictures of the jumps I made, the pictures of the sheet of paper and of them saying like, stop. And this big embarrassment that was welcoming turned into all the different other stuff we're going to talk about that's related to trail for me. Because prior to that, I'd worked in the woods a lot. I worked with at-risk youth and wilderness therapy programs for better part of 13 years. So I was no stranger to working out in the woods and doing trail rehab. But that one action of being like the rogue beeline builder and having someone respond sharply but welcoming, turned the corner and opened up some doors. So that was pretty cool.
That's a really interesting story. And what I'd like to know from that, and maybe we're skipping stuff, and if we are, fill it in. How did you go from that to actual, I'm going to say non-volunteer, the world of paid trail building? Because I came across the fact that you're also part-time with Long Cane Trails, or at least were at one point. And maybe we have some stuff to fill in.
No, that's all right. This will go. So doing that work in the trails down in Clemson led to me taking their the chainsaw training at Clemson University with Dr. Patrick Heisel. It's a great 6-hour course for people who don't need to take 3 full days of Forest Service class. Make sure you don't cut your arm off or something. And then it led to me becoming the volunteer coordinator for that organization by the final year I was down there. And so that just, kept feeding me. And I would look forward to these work days where 50 people would show up. We'd have to break into our small groups because there's too many people to deal with at once. And we started taking on more stuff. Kurz Edsel he's the South Carolina NICA league director. And he worked with Todd actually at Long Cane Trails to build a beautiful NICA race course. It's kind of mostly in the town of Central, but it's partnership with Central and Southern Wesleyan University and Clemson University. And so all these little things just kept happening to pull me further into that world, whether it's doing drain work over with him or doing work with the volunteers. And then when my wife was finished with grad school, we knew we wanted to come back to Western North Carolina. We both have family here, and she's from Old Fort actually. So her family is here in town or outside of town. And so we heard about the Old Fort Trails project, and we were thinking, man, like, what's going on with Old Fort? And she was like, I never would imagine moving back to my hometown, as a lot of people would say about small rural towns. So we started looking into it. I sent an email up to Jason McDougald at the G5 Trail Collective and said, hey, man, I'm a volunteer, down here in Clemson, or volunteer coordinator. I see what you guys are doing. I want to be part of it, move into town. He immediately responded within an hour, set up a meeting. We met at Hillman Beer here at one of the first brewery that was opened here in town, and just told me about everything he had going on, every project, every budgeting concern, every win. And it was just like magic. It's like, wait a second. This is like if back in the 90s when I was getting into mountain biking in Pisgah on the Brevard side, it was like if I was an adult then, like if I had already been to college and had careers and knew all the things I did and didn't like to do in life already. And now I get a chance to do it again. So I jumped in with him, volunteering, started leading work days, mostly on Katsuma, which a lot of people have heard, the Katsuma Trail in Old Fort. And so leading up to 4 work days a year on that trail alone. And he introduced me to the project that was to become the McDowell Tech Trail School. And so we'll just keep segueing over and over again as we get deeper into this. But so the Trail School is a partnership between the G5 Trail Collective, the United States Forest Service, and McDowell Tech Community College. And, Jason, and then on the Forest Service, Lisa Jennings, who you may have heard of, were looking at all the trails being built and looking at the larger economy and all the money going into trails. And they talked with McDowell Tech on the workforce development side and said, hey, you know, what if we did a school in Old Fort, you know, surrounded on three sides by national forest, endless outdoor classroom. What if we partnered up and created this school so that people could learn, you know, trail construction and maintenance and, you know, be part of this? This is not my word, but I'll use the word from the PTBA, the professionalization of trail construction industry, right? That's their word. But I think it speaks to this desire to have some level of standardization. You know, like when you hire an electrician, you know that they've passed certain tests the same way that a doctor's passed certain tests, right? There's certain things I believe a lot of us want most trail builders to understand and to practice. So they decided to do it, and they came up with their kind of basic idea of what a curriculum would be, and then put out a job description. And I applied, and I got the job. So here I was in Old Fort at the time for only a couple months, and now I'm basically starting. It's like a startup company within the community college system. If you've ever been a part of any of the systems, each department kind of runs like its own business. And so from everything from like the business cards to the logo design to the website, everything had to be started from scratch. And that's what I love doing. I've worked for a lot of startups. And so I guess you could say at that same time, that's not a full-time role. So at the same time, I was thinking, well, I want to be out on trail building. And that's when I met Todd. I had done several of his races. The Swank 65 is a longtime favorite of mine. ORAM, the off-road assault on Mount Mitchell, 65 miles. And I don't remember how many thousands of feet of climbing. Hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So I knew him through racing, but not as a trail builder. And I reached out and started subcontracting for him for about a year. And it just, you know, the more trails I worked on, the more I wanted to do. It helped that I was part-time, honestly, be fully honest with you. To do handwork and run a chainsaw 10 hours a day in your mid-40s is pretty brutal. So I'm glad that I was doing 2 to 3 days a week, not, you know, like a 5-10 hour day setup. And I think that kept it fresh along with the trail school, you know, setting up classes, working with instructors. So it all just kind of gelled around that, the, you know, desire to be out building, the artistry of that, the working with volunteers on the Old Fort on the G5 side, and then the meeting pro builders who have been awesome and wanted to teach through the program, which I am recruiting for too. So if any builders hear this and they would love to teach, I have a bunch of classes coming up to be posted here in the next couple months that are super exciting. And I have some new classrooms that I want to talk about whenever we get to that, some new outdoor classrooms.
Oh, we're gonna get to that, but we got like 8 different ways we could just take what you just uncovered. But we're gonna start with Old Fort as a community and the fact that you married somebody from Old Fort, which is now becoming, you know, a trail town, you know, as you referred to it as at the beginning of this with Glenn Jacobs. And for those that are not aware of what's happening in Old Fort, maybe you can give the elevator pitch of what's actually happening in Old Fort. I've been aware of it since probably 2021, I want to say, is when it first got on my radar. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there really is. And so, okay, so if I could paint a picture for someone who's never heard of Old Fort, many people have heard of Asheville, North Carolina. It's the hub it's the kind of city or town hub of Western North Carolina. It's the place where people come as a jumping off point for mountain adventures in Brevard, you know, in the greater Pisgah National Forest. And they do a lot of advertising. So probably you've heard of them because they're in every magazine for outdoor stuff. And so picture a small town, about 25-minute drive away from Asheville that is surrounded on three sides by national forest. And it's, as the crow flies, about 10 miles from the summit of Mount Mitchell, which is 6,684 feet, the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. And then you have this town, which was once a mill town. So millions of square feet of warehouse space that once upon a time was, one of them was the largest leather finishing plant in North America. We had Ethan Allen Furniture and, a number of other businesses over the years. And so you have a town that, up until the 50s, before a lot of the manufacturing jobs went overseas, was a bustling place. You had car dealership, you had movie theater, multiple grocery stores, clothing stores. Every little building storefront was full back in those days. And then, as you would probably hear, many small town stories, as the mills jobs left, the town kind of dried up, and it kind of sat in this place of limbo for decades. Something would come in and start up, and it would start to perk up again, and then it'd go away. And so we have a town where it's absolutely stunning natural beauty, huge waterfall near town, lots of things you can do for biking, hiking, and fishing. And yet at the same time, the town is still in this process of growth. So then imagine that town all of a sudden gets some local leaders that are riled up and really excited to bolster the outdoor economy. And they get this idea, hey, we want to add 42 miles of trails to the local trail system between the town and Mount Mitchell. And that group goes around and surveys a bunch of people, gets local groups involved, and they come up with some trail maps and look at all the old historical trails and logging roads and hunting paths, and they come up with a way to do it. And then a few years later, it gets funded. That's the big if. I showed up before. I would call myself the second wave of this because all that initial groundwork happened before I arrived. It's what, if it hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have been here. So the groundbreaking and backbreaking work that had to go on during that phase was crucial and is ongoing. And I'm just excited to be a recipient of all that. But when I started my mountain bike shuttle service for the town, it was because I knew the town's at 1,400 feet above sea level. The top of the famous Heartbreak Ridge Trail is 5120. So with nearly 4,000 vertical feet in this trail system, a lot of people will never ride that, unless they can find a way to get up to the top. So when I started that, the rest of the trails weren't funded yet. So you can imagine a small business person taking out a loan on a van, like getting their expensive racks all set up, and like, I hope this project doesn't stall, but when the state came in with the last 2.5 million last year that was needed for the $3.5 million trail system, that it sent a ripple shockwave through all of not just myself, but all the local small businesses who were taking a chance before something was a thing. And were just like hoping and praying that it would actually become something so that all of our hard work could keep, moving forward. So then you find today, right? The initial phase was about 6 miles of trails in a big parking lot with some bathrooms. The next phase was a trail parallel to Katsuma. And the big one that I had the awesome opportunity to work on this winter is the extension of Heartbreak Ridge, which will be opening here in a week or two. And what that does is from the top at the Blue Ridge Parkway down to the bottom by Camp Greer is a 12.4 mile downhill run with 4,280 feet of descent and only 700 feet of climbing. And as far as I can tell through talking with folks, that's pretty much the longest downhill run on the East Coast. Certainly, it's a spectacular one, regardless if it gets to hold that claim or not. So you have this whole trail system that's developing, and you have these big iconic trails we're working on, and you have a bunch of small businesses, a local bike shop, a new bakery is opening up, a new coffee shop opened up last year. The second brewery opened up, Wood-Fire Pizza. I know you love that.
Yeah, it's really not a trail community, though, Wood-Fire Pizza. Just want to be clear about that.
Well, I'll be clear. I'll have to treat you to some if you come to town, but it's the guy ordered his wood kiln or pizza oven from Italy and had it shipped over. And he was a chef at a fancy place up in Asheville and came down here, and he's loving it, and he sells out almost every day. It's pretty cool. So, all these new businesses are popping up, even peripheral stuff. We have water trails here too for the river. The Catawba River gets slow and sluggish as it hits Lake James near us. And so that is a blue trail that goes, I'm not sure how many miles, but a new kayak shop and fishing shop opened up in town as well. So, we see these small businesses starting to take a chance on this little town that once was big manufacturing, is now really coming together around the outdoor economy and trying to find a way to make this place very welcoming, but also exciting, exhilarating, and to provide ways that people can hang out after the ride, whether it's the breweries, whether it's the Arrowhead Gallery, which is a gallery and studio where you can take ceramics and glass blowing classes, whether it's going into the Davis, country store and getting a sandwich before your ride that's wrapped up in that special way in the, double wrap so it's not going to leak all over your bag. There's little things that we're all just such a small town. It's 800 people. So we're all talking to each other about how we can do better. And everybody's got this wealth of experience, but it's pretty amazing. I'd been in a lot of venture towns around the world and around this country in particular. And, you see all the little things that someone's like innovation, like, oh, if you do a breakfast burrito, you should wrap it in a plastic bag after, so that someone can take it with them. When you're in a small town that's in the process of becoming this big adventure town, you get to just walk in there and say, hey, have you thought about that? And they're like, oh, wow, that's a great idea. And then it just happens, And so that collaboration is happening between all of us all the time. And I mean, it's like a dream come true. I honestly can't express how excited I am for how receptive everyone is, how excited they are, how dedicated they are to this little town, and just how badly we all want to lift the town back up, to something. I mean, I'm not to say we want to go back to the 50s because that's a charged statement these days over the last 10 years. But to build us up to this functioning town that takes into account maybe some of the things that other trail towns haven't been able to solve, like the housing issues, for example, just to throw something out there.
Well, I was going to ask about that. So let's back up one step though. When it was in the 1950s, I know you said that was a charged statement, but when it was at its peak, do you know what the population was at that point? Just to kind of put this into perspective.
Eerily enough, almost exactly the same.
Really?
Population was within 10 or 20 of the same today.
I would imagine it would have been bigger.
Well, so basically construction stalled, new home construction stalled, and people have moved in and out, but the people who live here don't typically work here. And also it's an aging population. So I think the average age in town is 47, which is a little higher. There's a lot of folks in their 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Hey, be careful. That's our generation.
I know.
I mean the 40s and 50s.
I know. But, it's so that was one of the downsides, talking with Mr. Wilson, who takes care of all the flower pots in town. And he's at the local elementary school, the town fixture, was telling me how the biggest change is in the demographics. Like when there were Mills here, there were a lot more children and the elementary school was full. And whereas today it's like 1/3 the population of elementary school that it was prior. So I think that's one of the things that shifted. People used to work in town. Now they commute.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And one of the things that I know you're aware of is like, how do you do this smart growth, right? So you don't all of a sudden price locals out like you've seen, like not you've seen, but we've seen, a lot of people have seen in other communities all of a sudden, really rose up beyond what they maybe expected to, right? I know Tony Boone talks about this all the time in Colorado.
Right. I think there's some things we can do, and there's other things that are unfortunately will be completely out of our control. I don't know if you knew that I ran for town council last year and narrowly did not make it in. But, in thinking about serving in public office, I really was talking to a lot of folks in town and trying to figure out what was of concern and what was needed, and coupling that with my own experience in all these different trail towns. And it became very apparent that the cost of living was going sky high, not just, the way it has for everyone since 2020, but in a town that, where the average household income is somewhere around less than 50,000, like say 48,000. And rents started to creep up to almost the price of what you'd find in a neighboring Asheville, $2,200 for a single family home. And the prices of houses started to go dramatically higher and doubling in a lot of cases. And so that priced out all rent and purchase for someone who works in town, pretty much across the board. And so we already have experienced that before we've even become, right? Think about that. Like, all we've done is told the story and built 10 miles of trails. We haven't. In a week or two, we'll open Heartbreak, and that's going to change some things, right? Having such an iconic trail from Summit to the town. But so far, it's just the hype engine is not fully even here, and already prices are through the roof. So what can we do about it? There's an organization in nearby Marion, next town over in our county, that focuses on affordable and attainable housing. And so long as they have land that's on city water and sewer, they, last time I checked, could put together a house, say like a 1,200 square foot house for someone at a $800 a month mortgage, even additionally with down payment assistance. So one thing we have is looking at nearby land that's within, maybe not in the town limits, but could possibly be annexed and added to the town, so that organizations like that can work with families, who have a local average income and be able to afford a house. So that's one thing. Another thing another downside that will probably happen is we have a number of trailer parks in our town, even some on our main street. And we know eventually those will not exist. One of them is owned by a person who's already kind of given his number out, like what he's willing to sell for. And we know that probably that will get replaced with, say, a hotel or a motel or some other thing like that, right? Which we also need. But then where do the, 40 or 50 families go that are renting space, mostly renting in those for about $600 a month? How do you find a place to live for $600 a month almost anywhere in our country today? So ultimately, organizations like that Gateway Foundation in Marion and other foundations and grants, and we'll have to find ways to build affordable apartments, or find other places for people to move trailers on, to rent space, like rent pads, that kind of stuff, because we know, you've seen it everywhere. As the town becomes more popular, the downtown base becomes way more expensive. So I think, at least at this stage, we're all talking about, we are aware of it. I'm bringing more of this awareness to folks in town. If we know the changes are already here, but they're going to be even faster paced, and we need to think a little bit more about it, be more strategic, because you're never going to cap the price of real estate, right? You're never going to say, wow, we made this really desirable place, but don't come here and spend your money. So also being surrounded on three sides by national forest means we're hemmed in, right? So we have a limited amount of land that's buildable, and it's going to automatically create that price inflation that we see in all these beautiful trail towns around the world. So yeah, I think there's some ways we can address it. I think there's some unfortunate side effects, especially for people who are at average income and are trying to find a way to survive in our current state of the economy. But I am fortunate. I do think that we're fortunate that we're thinking about it and talking about it at this stage.
Well, and hopefully a positive side effect of that, and you've already alluded to this, is that the service industry can continue to grow to help provide wages for locals and living wages, because we all know that the service industry sometimes can't provide those living wages, but hopefully that's a positive side effect. I know you've probably heard of this town, but Cuyuna, Minnesota, or Cuyuna State Recreation Area, it's actually Ironton, and Crosby are the two communities adjacent to that recreation place in northern Minnesota. But when they added trails initially, locals were like, well, nobody's spending money here. But the reality is that people weren't spending money there because they didn't actually have anything to spend money on. Like there wasn't restaurants, there wasn't, places to stay, there wasn't reasons to keep people there. And then the locals quickly realized that, in order for us to actually keep people here and keep money here, we got to provide something for people to buy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So hopefully that'll help the economic side of that.
Oh yeah. And that was on Glenn Jacobs' list too, It's like you got to have the amenity. You got to have the coffee, ride, beer, got to have your wood fire pizza. You got to have places to hang out and do things. Got to have the rest day. As a board member of the McDowell Tourism Development Authority, one of the things we talk about is, once people are in our county, Old Fort is the very edge of the county. The next thing over is Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is. So if we don't up our game on the rest day for, with things for people to spend their time doing, or on rain day, then people will just drive over the mountain and go up to Asheville, right? Instead of spending more time down here and bolstering the local economy. So we're all very aware of that. That's why we're funding things like that Arrowhead Gallery expansion to have more ceramics classes, for example, so that, that may be something that you're into if you're hanging out and you just can't, you've already done 2 rides a day for several days and you can't do anymore.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, the last thing I want to do if I'm at a place for we'll say a vacation like that is to go drive to another community. Like I'd rather stay in the community I'm base camping out of, correct?
Right. Yes, for sure. And so, we even have some interesting things popping up in town, like our friends who call themselves Hey Old Friend have several mountain bike specific Airbnbs right in the center of town. And by mountain bike specific, I mean inside, maps on the walls. There's 2 bike stands on the first floor with all the full park tools set up. And when you check in, you get the key to the full bike shop. So super cool things happening like that hopefully help people realize like, oh, this is, a full service community. Like I can just hang out. I don't have to worry about logistics of getting from another, here to some other place.
Yeah, IMBA says it all the time. More trails close to home also help these communities in terms of like parking your vehicle, base camping out of there, not getting back in your vehicle again, hopefully until you actually leave to go home, right?
For sure.
Let's move on to McDowell Tech, because this ties into all this as well. And specifically, you've already alluded to how your position came to be at McDowell Tech. But one of the things you talked about is the upcoming classroom experiences. And I believe I know where you're going with one of these at least, which is potentially a pump track. But let's talk about, what's going on at McDowell Tech and where you see that going. Okay.
This is another thing I'm super excited about because I've told the story of how I got involved, and what it's ended up becoming is I just get to work with more and more awesome people in the woods, and the way I set this up is these classes are all workshop style. So they're anywhere from 2 days to 5 days long. And I'll get a professional instructor, like a pro builder to come in, or a land manager. Lisa Jennings with the Forest Service teaches. John Lane, the director of the G5 Trail Collective, teaches. Recently had Trace Sowell of Geosculpt Trail Designs, who's building the Lower Heartbreak, come in and do a really awesome class on mountain bike optimized trails, where we built a jump line in a new bike park that's being built here in town. So basically, I'll do all of the logistics, machinery, equipment, tools, people management, and then I'll bring in a builder and say, like, just figure out how you want to talk about your process, how you design, how you lay out, how you build, how you operate machines, how you move rock, how you highline, all the different things that people have specific expertise in. Don't worry about the teaching so much. Don't worry about the logistics of a classroom. You don't have to have the fanciest PowerPoint. Put it all together and let's talk about it. And then I'll just be there the entire time as your assistant. And, I'll go to take the other group of people to do stuff, or I'll make sure you have everything you need. And that, for me, I could say that's extremely rewarding, right? Because I'm just getting to work with awesome people all the time and really excited students. And then what it's ultimately doing too is it's a part of this broader push throughout the country to provide trail training with, more regularity and more structure. And so I'm taking curriculum, the American Trails is working on their trailskills.org project that they've been working on, and even things like the Pacific Crest Trail Association and their massive catalog of trail trainings, and just building on those already existing things to come up with these fun classes that are largely informed by the builder themselves. I didn't set out specifically to build a jump line with Trace, but that's what he's into. And when I walked the area out there in the woods, and we had already flagged out a couple trails and cut corridor, and he glommed onto this one. He's like, oh man, I can see this step down here, and I can see that over there. And look, there's a step up down there. He was into it. You could tell there's no way you're going to get him to build anything else. Like, that's it. So then let's design a class for that. So that's how that works, and why I'm so excited about both the students and the classes. The students are largely not professional trail builders at this stage. Most have been land managers. They've people work for Parks and Rec who took a job, and all of a sudden they're now in charge of 25 miles of trail or 100 miles of trail. They're people who had maybe never thought about how to maintain or build a trail before, but for whatever reason, their job has led them to a place where now they're responsible for all this and they don't know how to do it. And so that's our vast majority of students so far have been on the land management side for state parks, federal, national forests, and local municipalities. We have put a couple of people through who took professional jobs in trail construction. And we also have a fair amount of volunteers who come through that either they need the Forest Service cert to run a chainsaw on national forest lands, or they have been volunteering and they just want to learn more. Maybe they want to become a trail crew leader. So that's kind of our makeup, kind of the structure of the school. And that leads me to some of the upcoming classes that I'm excited about. So a while ago, we have a new state trail that's coming through Old Fort called the Fonta Flora State Trail. And it's one of 4 state trails in our county, which is pretty amazing. But it's coming through from the town of Morganton all the way to Asheville, and it's coming through our town. And everyone agreed, including the town council, to a trail head here in the center of town that would have, bathrooms and a dog park and pavilion, kind of hang out, kind of like a lot of towns have. And in the original plans, it had pump track. It was designed by a Western North Carolina group called Destination by Design, kind of a town planning and organization. But, everyone says, well, if you're going to do a pump track, it has to be paved. That's because no one wants to deal with maintenance. So then that's great business for Velo Solutions, right? And other folks who like to do paved tracks. And it's great for people who like riding on paved tracks, but also pavement's hard and concrete's hard. So those hardened surfaces, do provide a barrier to entry for new riders that a lot of people don't think about. But I was kind of messing around with this in my head, and I was thinking, is there a way we could do this ourselves with dirt? Because there was no money for a huge paved pump track. So I went to talk with the executive director of the Friends of the Fauna Flora and pitched this idea of the community learning pump track and skills park. And the concept is this: they'd take some part of that park, a bunch of piles of dirt, and then 3 times a year bring in a pro builder. They get to design in their class, like I say, a 3-day class, design and build some part of the track. The first person kind of gets free reign, right? Because the park is just piles of dirt. The next class comes in, maintains the existing track, gives the people who are taking the class the understanding of how do you deal with drainage issues, how do you deal with soil degradation, and then design and build more track. And so that in that way, the track's always getting attention. It's always getting professional touch, kind of like your maintenance contract idea we talked about at the beginning. So I pitched that idea and they loved it. And they're like, really? Like, yeah, that's awesome. When can you do it? Soon. So we, went through a bunch of phases of legal stuff and memorandums of understanding and all that. And we're to the point now where next week, 1,000 cubic yards of dirt gets delivered from a local build. And our first instructor, your last host or a guest, Peter Mills, Elevated Trail Designs, is our first person to come out and design and build. And he's super stoked to be part of that. He's done some training for the PTBA on pump track build. And from talking with him that he's really into anything bike park and anything pump track. And so, yeah, I'm super excited about that project. And I'm glad that it's coming to fruition so quickly, because the whole process started only a couple of months ago. So that's probably like world record timing.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, it's strange because, 10 years ago, if we were talking about this, world record timing for things wasn't a thing, but now all of a sudden it's been super accelerated. What other courses or what other topics, that's probably a better word, topics, would you like to see or are you anticipating in the future for classes?
Sure. So I have a PTBA builder. I don't think she's building as a PTBA member now, but Fred Lashley, who is a rock work expert, who's going to do a rock work and rigging and grip hoist and high line and all that kind of stuff class. And I'm super excited to have her expertise. That is, for some, a lost art, and for some, something people kind of try to figure out on their own that is fairly dangerous. So
could you say her name again? Because you just happened to cut out right at that moment when you said her name.
Yeah. Fred Lashley.
Fred Lashley? Okay. Got it.
Yep. And another one is, so here's something that we played around with Trace's jump line class that I'm working on. And it's a hybrid machine class. So everybody's trying to figure out how to teach excavator, and mainly excavator, but sometimes, sutter dozer, whatever. How do you actually teach that in the woods if you're not just on a trail build, right? And so a couple of things occurred to us when we were out here in Old Fort. One is that you can't have everyone in a machine, because if they just dig up a bunch of stuff, then who's going to finish it? And then the other part is, if you have a hybrid class where someone's learning machine and other people are learning finishing at the same time, those people finishing get to give some pretty valuable feedback to that operator. Like, hey, you didn't move that lump of dirt. Guess what? Moving that by hand will take us 4 hours, but it will take you 15 minutes or maybe 1 minute in some cases. So, what we're playing around with is this concept of a hybrid machine class where some of the people sign up for machine operator lesson or class, and the other people sign up for hand finishing or general class, and they operate at the same time, so that they're going along, cutting open new trail and finishing it behind them, and that everyone's getting that feedback loop, back and forth. And it worked really well. It just kind of happened organically that first time with Trace, but I think we're going to do a lot more of that because, I want people to understand start to end on whatever process they're doing. And we just happen to have, in addition to the Forest Service land and this awesome new community pump track, but we have a new bike park we're building in town called the Watershed Bike Park. And it's 100 acres, and it's partially will be professionally built and as a hybrid concept. And then some trails are going to be set aside for the trail school so that over time, year by year, we can take more people out there. Because that's one hard thing to find, right? Getting a landowner that will let you build on their land, will deal with the insurance, will deal with all the things that come with that. And also not having a finished product right away. And also that's a person that's okay with the fact that when you're doing a class, the primary goal is instruction and education. Secondary goal is certain amount of foot of trail constructed, right? And who knows what that'll happen. So, you have to find a pretty special person that will be willing to support that. And in our case, it's Casey McKissick and Casey and Amanda with the Watershed, who are super, super supportive of this whole process. So I'm excited to do more hybrid machine classes out there. And then with the, additionally with the pump track, a machine independent study concept where, once you've taken a machine class and shown basic proficiency, then we have a CAT 301.7 owned by the school, sign up for certain hours. Like say we're out there on Fridays, you come out and get a few hours in, move dirt around in an area where you're not benching trail, you're not on a 45-degree side slope. You're in a relatively safe place where you just get familiar with the machine and the controls. And so I'm pretty excited about those few things. Kind of on top of my list.
So in summary, what this kind of sounds like is a person could actually take a working vacation, or maybe we could call it a learning vacation, and come to Old Fort, whether it's, as you said, as a volunteer or through, we're going to say continuing education needs, through their employer or what, as a land manager, whatever their employment situation is, and get trail training right there.
Yes. It's cool that you caught on to that because not everybody has thought that all the way through, but that is in there from the beginning. So the one thing I forgot to mention about the trail school is that we are building a campus satellite right in the center of town. That is probably, the current date of opening is August of this year. And so it's 3 classrooms and a big garage for equipment and tools. And it's just right here in town. And what that does is, in conjunction with the G5 Trail Collective and Camp Greer, who have, a 600-acre camp right next to town, some folks between all those groups are putting together a bunch of cabins, like rental cabins, in addition to the Airbnbs we have. And the concept is they'll bring in groups of people, say like there's summer seasonal employees of the Forest Service. There's other groups called like Wild South that do, they'll come on for part of a summer and do trail work and forestry work. And a lot of those folks are paid by the federal government as I can't remember the word. It's like a mentorship. And mostly it's just like $15 an hour or something. But how they really get paid is in the experience and in certifications. So, quite a few of those groups will send their folks to us for the chainsaw cert for the Forest Service. And that's just one more way that they can incentivize folks to stay around for a season. So yes, you could, whether it was your job required continuing education credits, which, because these are through a community college, it's part of the North Carolina State college system, you get your CEs. for the classes. You could stay in town, you could ride bikes, not even need to drive a car. You could get on a shuttle, you could go to the top, you could, do some artwork, hang out at a brewery, get your wood fire pizza, pretty much all in one place. And that's part of the grand vision. I would say it's slowly coming to be, because sometimes to me it feels slow and waiting for a building for a year and a half in town. But for other people looking from the outside, I'm sure it's a lightning pace.
You mentioned cabins and stuff, and we maybe should have talked about this when we were talking Old Fort. What is the camping situation in there? I mean, I know there's U.S. Forest Service land around there, but is it all primitive camping? Is there any camping? Do you have some, I'm going to say non-primitive in terms of like any kind of like shower house and bathrooms with running water type of situation?
Good question. So Curtis Creek, which is 3 miles, well, the actual campground, probably 10 miles from town. That's a little ways. That's official camping that has the whole camp set up and kind of reserved campsites. Of course, in the national forest, at least on this side of the country, dispersed camping is permissible anywhere in the forest. So you can primitive camp anywhere. And then on certain gravel roads, they'll say whether you can camp anywhere or specific marked sites. And then there's rumors of a person who's wanting to develop, one of the campgrounds. I don't know if it's a branded campground like a AAA or anything, but right off of the main strip in town on the other side of the interstate. So that's been a rumor for a few years, but it's changed hands. And so I hopefully that picks up and becomes an actual thing. But yeah, I don't know that there's a nearby like full service campground as of yet, unless you would like to start one.
Well, I think, I do have family in North Carolina. They're on the wrong side of North Carolina is what I tell them they're on the wrong side of North Carolina. They're on the coast. And yeah. I prefer the mountains. So in my eyes, they're on the wrong side of North Carolina.
Right. I know it's beautiful on the coast too, for sure. Floods a lot lately, unfortunately.
If you're into beach activities, anything having to do with the ocean, fishing, like that kind of stuff, that's your home, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Not a lot of mountain biking over there. There's that's growing though, but not a ton. But yeah, so I don't think I'll be starting a campground there, but I do. I think. Okay, well, it's a growing. I'm not going to say a growing, but it's been a thing when it comes to kind of that well-rounded trail community, right? Is various different diversified longer stay situations, right? So everybody has a place to stay and they can either camp or like you said, Airbnbs or cabins. Like having all of that accessible, I think helps create a good ecosystem of tourism, right?
Yeah, in this phase, this growth phase, right? I'd be remiss to fail to mention that the G5 Trail Collective is largely comprised of Camp Greer and Jason McDougald and the guys that were there, and them working with Lisa at the Forest Service, and they have a 600-acre camp that's surrounded on all sides by national forest, and they have been very generous with that camp in this building phase of the community. They just last week hosted the local Fox Factory group who came out and did trail building actually on a trail called Newberry Creek that's needs to be redesignated for mountain bikes. So it had to be moved away from some trout headwaters. And so they hosted Fox, the Fox employees to come out and stay on their land and do the work. And then we got to shuttle them up the next day, for a kind of their congratulatory ride. But, they've been hosting bi-yearly volunteer days or volunteer weekends that start like Friday afternoon and go through Sunday afternoon. And the last one, it's 175 people showed up for this trail work weekend. So, it started small, like 20 to 40 people. And now that's 175 people showing up. And we go out and work on Saturday for about 6 hours. We do a bunch of shuttle runs for folks and then have a big meal, have beer sponsors, People could camp. They could stay in cabins at the camp. So they have kickstarted that scene that you're talking about, where people can come and they don't have to pay for lodging and they don't have to worry about expensive Airbnbs or hotels or whatever. And I think they'll have to, at some point they'll have to pass that torch to a local entrepreneur, right? Someone who's wants to actually run a camp or a campsite. And they'll be more than happy to pass that on, I'm sure. There's a fair amount of work and money and time that goes into hosting things like that. And they host a lot of things, races, running races, mountain bike races, and work days, industry events, the Outdoors for All, here. So yeah, they're doing tons and tons for it. But I think of that definitely as like they've kickstarted the whole scene. And someday someone's going to take one of these other beautiful pieces of land next to the river or something and kick up a new campsite area. And that will become the scene, I think.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I have to ask this question because I ask almost everybody this question. You probably know what this question is. And I'm going to ask it for you to answer it selfishly, because not what everybody needs, but what you prefer to see. And that is, what are the ingredients that you prefer to see that comprise of that make up a great trail community?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Selfishly, using my own examples here, I want a trail community where people who have never been to the area feel welcomed, where you look around, you see bikes on racks in town, where you feel like you can park your car without your bike getting stolen while you're having a beer, so a place that feels welcoming and secure. And I want it to be surrounded by trails that are both on one end accessible, right? Lots of accessible, as Glenn Jacobs would say, lots of blue trails, but also some trails that you can't clean, maybe ever, or maybe you can clean them down, but not up. Or maybe there's several segments that, you can't do, or there's beelines that are beyond your ability. So, I'm really stoked to have some super exciting builds coming up in the area where there'll be tons and tons of beelines, and there'll be stuff that anyone can get down the trail, but there'll be a lot of things that I will never touch probably in my life. And that's exciting. It keeps it fresh,
Yeah, for sure. I do know. And I think I think that's becoming a more common answer. And I think, like, me personally, I'm looking for the same type of opportunities. How about a cork knuckle? You going to throw a cork knuckle into the mix?
I know. I tried to build one on this pump track that I'm building. It's a different pump track in town. So we'll eventually have 3 pump tracks in town, and all of them will be dirt, which is super exciting. Yeah, I tried to build one, but for people who don't know, I'm going to explain a cork knuckle real quick for people who haven't heard of that before. And so if you take 2 rollers that are parallel to each other, right, and say like 10 feet apart, that a beginner rider can roll through it, a advanced rider can gap over it. But that's really it in between, right? If you take those 2 and you bring the parallel, you bring one end to touch the other, now you have a V shape. And on one end, you have a big roller, just one roller. On the other end, you have 2. So the farther you go away from the point that they touch, the bigger the gap becomes. And what you end up with is a green line, which is just rolling over a bump, and then a small double and a large double. And instead of having an A-B line, you've got like an A-B-C-D-E-F-G line where, you can come at it from almost any angle and make it bigger or smaller or more of a risk or less of a risk. And that's pretty cool. Pretty cool to think about. If I could ride a trail that had multiples of those in one trail, that'd be pretty amazing too, because you'd always find a different way to progress your own skills. Even if you just were going a slight angle to get one more foot of air over the gap, pretty cool.
You just explained that in a very good way for people that this is an audio only podcast, and I think that was about the best way I could have ever heard anybody explain what a cork knuckle is. So thank you for that. That was really good.
I thought of it last night, so I can't say that came up instantaneously.
Yeah. I mean, unless you see the visual, it's a tough thing to explain, and you nailed it, man. So
thanks
again. I appreciate that. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, that topics that you wanted to bring up that we haven't discussed yet?
I don't think so at this stage. I think what would be really cool is to talk again in a year or two about what has happened. What happened in this town in the meantime. Now that all these people have put all their blood, sweat, and tears in, and the millions of dollars, and the town is stepping up, and local businesses are stepping up, and tourists are starting to come. The trails, like say the trails are all finished. What does that look like? That's the next thing I want to talk about, because I'm living it day to day. And anybody who hears this podcast and wants to know more about it, just reach out. I know you put a bunch of links in afterwards, but it's just a super cool thing to be a part of. And I'm excited to watch it or participate in its unfolding, and excited to tell the story of how I see it.
Yeah, there'll definitely be links for Mountaintop Shuttles, the G5 Collective, McDowell Tech, and anything else that, we need to include with this in the show notes. So if people want to learn more, they definitely need to go to the show notes and find those links. I'm kind of starting to move away from thank yous, because so many people I have on could say thank yous for a whole entire podcast, but I'm fairly certain you probably have a couple pointed thank yous, because it sounds like this path has taken the route that it has with a couple key people. So why don't you throw a couple key thank yous out there?
Oh man. Well, I do have to definitely thank the town council, the aldermen of Old Fort, for taking a risk on all this and supporting so many of the projects. Some of them have been around for 35 years on the council, and I'm sure they've seen a massive amount of change as a result of this. Definitely Jason McDougald and, Camp Greer and G5, Lisa Jennings, John Lane with G5 as well. Definitely thank my wife and her family, who started a pottery back here. She's a second generation potter, and they started a pottery in Old Fort 43 years ago. Used to be downtown. And having family in town is crucial. Having family to lean on and support, and to, when you take ideas that seem crazy, like let's start a mountain bike shuttle service in a town, that's 800 people. So everybody's been really supportive in the family of that, and I'm super excited to have that. So yeah, Chad Schonauer at the Old Fort Bike Shop, or having a bike shop in this town, is crucial. Casey McKissick for the greater classroom space over there at the Watershed Bike Park. And then all the builders who are coming into town, Peter and Trace, and anyone who's listening who wants to come teach here. It's the kind of thing where you just come for a working vacation, like we talked about, but on the other side of it, and you get to share your wisdom and knowledge without a whole lot of stress, and get some good rides in. So I'm sure there's a lot more people that I could thank, but that's who came to mind right off the cuff.
Well, Jeremy, I thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to talk about everything that you have going on there with Old Fort and McDowell Tech and the G5 Collective and Mountaintop Shuttles, and how you got to this place, and obviously how we kicked this thing off at the PTBA Conference and the SORBA Summit. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks a lot, Josh. It's awesome talking with you.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you've heard, please take the time to share these shows with others. Sharing these shows will help create awareness of both the guests who have taken the time to be on the show and the podcast series itself. Also, if you're new to the Trail Effect Podcast, check out our ever-expanding library of episodes. If you listen to the Trail Effect Podcast on Apple or Spotify, please don't forget to leave a rating and review, as this is one of the best ways to show our support for the Trail Effect Podcast. Also, don't forget to check out Cooley Creative at www.dudejustsendit.com. For additional ways to help support the Trail Effect Podcast, check out the affiliate links tab at the Trail Effect website, where you'll find links to Kettle Mountain Apparel, Worldwide Cyclery, and Trail One components. By using the affiliate links found at www.traileffectpodcast.com, a small commission will come back to the podcast, which will help keep this thing going. This podcast has been edited and produced by Evolution Trail Services. Thank you again for listening.